here. Good evening, friends, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome and thank you for coming to this meeting. My name is Jasbir Singh and I am a member of the Justice for the Northwest 10 Campaign London Support Group. I'm sure many of you know about the case of the Northwest 10. However, I think some of you may know some details and not all, and I think before I introduce the speakers, it might be useful if I spend 5 minutes just giving you some of the details. About 3 months ago, just under 3 months ago, on Wednesday, April the 8th, an intelligence-led raid, and that too a rushed intelligence-led raid by the Northwest Counter-Terrorism Unit, arrested 12 men in various parts of Northwest England. These included 11 Pakistani nationals, and of the 11 Pakistani nationals, of these 10 actually had students' visas. Nearly all the students came from the Northwest Frontier province of Pakistan. The raids followed a very well publicized mistake by the then Assistant Commissioner Bob Quick, who many of you may have read in the newspapers, who walked into Downing Street with papers under his arm marked secret. And this had details of an ongoing operation or an ongoing raid. I mean, following that, this operation actually did take place, and as we all know, Assistant Bob Quick resigned the next day. The students were detained for just under 3 weeks. They were questioned, they were investigated fully, their accommodations were searched, their universities were searched, the place where they actually lived, the neighborhoods, the police talked to people around the neighborhoods, police talked to restaurants which the students frequented, police talked to places where they actually went, and after 3 weeks of long investigation, there was absolutely no evidence whatsoever. Typically, as we all know, the police can hold suspects who have been arrested under the Terrorism Act for a period of 28 days, 4 weeks. But under less than 3 weeks, they decided to release the students. The students were not just released free to go back to their studies, but they were actually released into the hands of the UK Border Agency. The UK Border Agency arrested them, and now all 10 of them are in prisons in Manchester and in prisons in Leeds as well. When these arrests took place, I think it's worthwhile to note, and that too in very dramatic fashion, where students were actually pulled out of lecture halls. One of them was actually pinned down for 2 hours in handcuffs, being arrested. Our Prime Minister made a statement basically saying that the police have actually foiled a huge terrorist plot that was ongoing. I mean, following the Prime Minister's statements, there were also several articles in various different press newspapers, basically saying, giving details of some of the evidence for the case itself as well. I think this actually set a very dangerous precedent. Not only it becomes prejudicial and for the students themselves with regards to what the Prime Minister is saying and what the press is saying. Also, if this case actually did go to court, it did not go to court, as I said, it was just for lack of evidence. It did go to court. There could have been serious questions with regards to contempt of court as well. The case of Northwest 10 raises a number of issues, and I'm sure my expert panel speakers here will talk about some of the issues, but it raises the whole issue about how people are actually held under these terrorist acts, how they're detained, how the whole issue with regards to 42 days, which was a defeated motion. I think we're having problems with the microphone. Okay, I think I'll just continue. It raises the whole issue about 42 versus 28 days, bearing in mind that students were actually released less than 28 days in 3 weeks itself. It also raises the whole issue about secret evidence and the Special Immigration Appeals Courts, the SIAC courts. If the students who are, as you will hear from some of the speakers, struggling with this horrific ordeal, if the students actually stay long enough in the UK to have their cases eventually heard, they will never know why they were actually held in prison. They will never know the evidence against them which branded them as terrorists and so on. And neither will their lawyers be. I think I'm not going to say anything more. I'm going to start introducing some of the speakers as they give their talk. But just before we do that, over the last few weeks, we have had some of the members of the campaign actually travel to Pakistan to speak to some of the parents there. We've managed to have successful meetings there, which Tariq later will speak about. But we've also had telephone conversations with several of the parents. We were hoping to have a live telephone conversation this evening, but unfortunately, because just where this theatre is actually located, deep down here, we're not be able to get a proper reception, and we won't be able to get a landline from the university. We have recordings of conversations which actually did take place earlier this morning. I'm going to get Naeem to play some of these, but just a couple of pointers on that. Firstly, some of the recordings are of poor quality. I mean, the speakers are, we have two people. One is Ijaz Bakri, who is coming from the Darak Ismail Khan area, and the second is Nasrullah Khatar. I mean, both of them are in areas where there's bombings taking place. It's a very difficult situation as well. So some of the recording may not be all that good, but not only because of that, but because of the reception as well. And if there are any interviews, Tariq, I'm sure you'll help with some of the interpretation.
I'm going to start with Javed Berkey. Ijaz Berkey, sorry.
Mr. Berkey, Mr. Berkey, I understand that your brother came to study in UK. Could you tell us how long ago he came to study here and what was he studying?
Well, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Ijaz Berkey and I am the head of Mr. Abdul Wahab. Mr. Abdul Wahab went to UK in October 2006 to have a higher education in computer science and information technology. And he got his admission in Liverpool, Jammu University in Liverpool.
How much of the course had he completed when he was arrested?
Well, before his arrest, he had completed 95% of his education, and only 2 modules at this point of time are remaining, and which he was supposed to appear in the first week of May 2009. But unfortunately, he would not appear due to his detention in the prison.
Do you know why they were arrested?
Well, so far as the information we have received is that they are a threat to national security of United Kingdom, and when they were tried in the court, they were proved innocent, and no allegation or any criminal evidence was found against any of the individual. And as a result, they were released, but at the same time, they were served with notices of deportation. And Mr. Wahab applied for, he filed an appeal against deportation, and since then, he has been kept in jail.
I understand they kept this Category A prison. Have you been able to speak to your brother since his arrest?
In the last week, he has made a report card to his parents in our village. And once he has also made a contact with me.
How do you think he feels at the moment? I mean, being kept...
He is very worried about his incomplete education because already he has spent 3 years. And what you know, I would like to share with all of you that before going to UK, we had arranged a loan for him. Even if I will tell you that we have sold out our private property for him to enable him to go to UK and get a higher education. And this very thing is quite disturbing and very much teaching for all of us. Not only for him, but for all of our family members.
So what would your message be to the British government? What would you want them to do?
Well, I would request the British authorities and British people and request them not to sacrifice the education, the freedom and future happy life of my brother Mr. Abdul Wahab, and we want them to release them as early as possible. consider his case specifically, and he be allowed to complete his education, which I have already said that 95% is already completed and only 5% is remaining. And we request the British people as well as the British authorities to ponder over these very issues basically on compassionate grounds and let the innocent students be allowed to fulfill their dreams for completing their higher education. We have sent them to UK with a very great ambition for my brother to complete their higher education, which was a long standing desire of my brother.
Thank you very much, Mr. Barki. We will probably try and do everything possible to see whether that your brother should be released and be able to complete his education. I understand there is likely to be a bail hearing in the end of July. Are you looking forward to see that your brother would at least be released on bail?
Well, this is the actual question. That once the release and payment decision makes it be confirmed, so that they are able to receive their examination. Just imagine that only 2 modules are remaining, and 95% of his education has already been completed. And I think that this very compassionate ground will make this be allowed to appear in these very 2 modules and complete their education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Barki. We will speak to you again. Thank you. Assalamualaikum. Assalamualaikum. Okay, we'll start again. Mr. Khattak, I understand your brother came to study in Britain. Could you tell us a bit more detail? Your son came to study in Britain. Could you tell us a bit more details about what he came to study and how long had he been in Britain?
Thank you for telling me the express my views in Great Britain. Yes, I can see in my young son, you are studying in Manchester and IT, Redford Professional College in Manchester campus. You are studying for the last 2.5 years. This was his final year. Finally, he told me that MBA specific path. Hello?
Hello. How much of the course that he had? So he was about to take his final exams or?
No, he didn't told me for final exam, but his video was up to 30th September.
Okay. So he would have finished his course by the 30th of September, you're saying?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. Do you know why they were arrested?
I'm sorry that I don't know, but I will say that it is totally wrong that they were arrested.
Okay, so have you been able to speak to him on the phone since his arrest?
Yeah, 4 times.
Okay.
He started to talk with me on telephone from 72.
Okay. How does he feel being held as a Category A prisoner in Britain?
He doesn't know, and I do not know. I do not know that why he is kept as Category A. This is sorry. I will say that it is injustice that he is kept as Category A. Because they are saying that there are no such evidence against Ahmed Rashid.
Okay. So what do you feel that the British government should do, and what do you expect of the British justice system?
Naeem, you see that we have heard and we have seen the British government justice, but in this case, this is really totally wrong that they are arrested and such issues. I will assure you that as far as me and my family concerned and my grandfather, we have never and we are never involved in such type of activities, and we cannot think about such type of activities.
Mr. Khattak, what do you expect the British government to do for your son?
should be released 8 days to continue his study and extend his visa to continue his study there, and compensate also for because they have disgraced us and him and throughout the world. They deserve it.
So you would want his name to be cleared before he returns to Pakistan?
Yeah, of course.
Thank you, Mr. Khattak. We will speak to you again. Thank you. Assalamualaikum.
As you can see, the recording is not of very good quality, and as you can expect, some of them are not perfect English speakers. We had meetings in Pakistan as well. Tariq and Mahmood, together with John Nicholson, were in Pakistan in the latter part of May, and they had several families together, which Tariq will talk about. Just before I had our first speaker, I just want to say a few words about the London support group. I mean, following the arrest, there was a public meeting in Manchester towards the end of April and early May, and the national campaign was launched. We currently have support groups here in London, a support group in Birmingham, which had a public meeting last weekend, a support group in Sheffield, a support group in Liverpool, and we're also in the process of starting up a support group in Bradford. I think these support groups are absolutely critical so that people not just know about the case of these 10 students, but also know about the implications of this particular case. There is a file which is going around for you to put your name, your email details, if you want to keep track of what's happening, if you want to get involved in the campaign. So please fill your name in, and we will make sure that you actually, it's over there at the moment, we make sure that you are actually informed about the details as we go along. Our first speaker is Tariq Mahmood. Tariq is a writer, is a lifelong campaigner. Tariq has also been charged with similar terrorist charges many years ago in the early 80s. Some of you who have grey hairs like mine will remember the Bradford 12 campaign. And he obviously feels with this campaign very strongly. Tariq?
Stop knocking things over. I probably wouldn't be out if it wasn't for Gareth, who's sitting next to me as well. But really, it's a pleasure to see so many old friends coming together. And it's been a very long time. I don't know where this we've got the Lifeline campaign from. But it's been a long time since I've started and got involved in campaigning like we are doing. I live in Manchester. These students the campaign is called Justice for the Northwest 10. Most of them, in fact all of them bar one, are from the northwest frontier of Pakistan. And they were also arrested in the northwest of England. And in a sense, one thing that has happened in Britain, and particularly around the northern cities, it's not an exaggeration to say that people are living under terror. Usually when you go to organize, I've organized a lot of meetings, and usually knock on doors and encourage people to come. I knocked on one door of a friend of mine, and he said, please take what money you want for the campaign, leave us alone, we can't afford to get involved in this sort of a thing. Now, we are living in the terror, but I'd like to take you a little bit back, what it means for people who send their children to England. If any of you have ever watched a Bollywood film, it's the place of romance. It's the place, where you come and sing and dance in open-air carriages of cars, and probably the prodigal son or daughter, when they return, will do well after being educated in Britain. These students, some of them are from lower middle-class families. Some of them, their families have literally sold the family silver to get their children to come and study in this country. Now, I was at home talking to a parent when these students had been arrested. And the father of one of the children said to me, what is going to happen to my children when they grow up? I said, yeah, it's not that bad. There's a long way to go. We're only 7 and 8 at the moment. And I think that really the fear in this situation wasn't something imaginary. But the organization of the campaign became very necessary because we're dealing with an extraordinary situation in extraordinary times. The implications of those could be devastating for all of us here and catastrophic for people in overseas countries. And by that I mean this country is engaged in war of, I believe, a new colonial war. We are living in the so-called war on terror. These students are a direct living link in the arrest of people in Pakistan. Where they come from, there is a raging war going on. We are expecting some form of justice should they be deported to a country whose army can kick out 3.5 million people at the behest of an American-inspired war of occupation. In this country, we are being led into a dead end. A dead end that means that constant whipping up of racism, it cannot stop, it will not stop, it will engulf every single one of us in this room and our children to come, because like the old crusading wars of the past, there is no end in this war, because this is not a war in the conventional sense of armies fighting armies. It's an imperialist bloc of people out to colonize our world again. They cannot do this without creating poison in this country. I have had left-wing friends of mine who have said to me after the bombings in London, when are you going to bomb me? And my eyes filled with tears at a comment of this. These were anti-racist. I won't name them, maybe it was drink that had got to them. But these were friends who I was with, and I was so appalled by this situation, because in a sense, even in the eyes of our friends, we are slowly but surely being transformed into terrorists. Now these arrests that take place in Manchester are not the first arrests that take place in Manchester. If you take your memories back, there was a plot once to blow up Old Trafford football ground by North Africans and Algerians and some other people from North Africa. I don't remember all the details of it. The police raided it in a blaze of publicity, and it was all over the world. When you see the stuff on your telescreens, you're not just seeing them in Britain. Millions, if not billions, of people across the world are seeing images of nasty Muslim terrorists living in Britain about to blow this place to smithereens. It's all over the world. But what people don't know is shortly after these people's lives were destroyed, they were given football tickets by the police to go watch the match at Old Trafford. Not very long ago, if you remember, there was a convoy of Viva Palestina going to take some humanitarian aid to Gaza. There was a terror raid on the M56, and once again in a blaze of publicity, and these people were held up. What people never got to find out, actually the police bought them air tickets to go join the convoy later on in Tunisia, but that became by the by. The poison was in the act, the poison was in the raid. So when we saw the raids taking place, the image behind you, I too saw the images. If you go on our website, you read some of the newspapers that were appalling. The Daily Telegraph put forward an article which said, the guy who was released, I forget his name now, he used to work near a chemical factory. I mean, oh my God. The fact that he worked near a chemical factory was equated very clearly with the fact that he was involved in some form of terror activity which may or may not have involved a chemical factory. It was nothing of the sort. The Times and a few other newspapers, again the articles are all available for you to look at, have been mounting a campaign that some of these students, and these incidentally are picked up in Pakistan as well. We live in a very small world indeed. That these mounting campaigns, that these people were fiddling the immigration rules to come into this country, that they're not really all genuine students. I mean, we live in a remarkable country of fiddlers, where even the Home Secretary who withdraws the visas of these kids are watching pornos at our expense and fiddling, and British law makers, surely we don't have to go into any details now. The two things surely must be synonymous. Who didn't win it? Which student doesn't try to get through some loopholes? But that's not, again, very important. It's important insofar that the campaign of vilification continues. It tarnishes all students because they're talking about the fact that if you come from the northwest frontier province of Pakistan, then surely we are going to have something to do with terrorism somewhere on the world. There is a war going on in the northwest frontier of Pakistan, and there is a war going on in Britain. The wars are qualitative different. We are here fodder, a poisonous fodder for a machine. But let me go a little further. When we tried to organize our campaign, it was truly difficult to get people to come out and sit and talk to us, because they are genuinely scared what will happen to us. I managed to get one of my neighbors to come, and he keeps complaining that since he started attending the meetings, his mobile phones don't work anymore, and things have gone wrong. You know, I'm forever apologizing to him, but I say, look, it's too late now. You might as well help us to organize a little bit more. But in a sense, you know, one of the things is that I think that there are divisions within the British society, including divisions within the security forces that led to the arrests of these students. Not all of them were happy that the raid should take place. Another important thing is that they were never released. It's a misconception. They were never freed. They were held in prison. 2 weeks after they were held, the police declared them effectively to be innocent, and they were just locked up under an immigration administrative process. I'm not a lawyer, but therefore I won't go into those things. The implications of that really doesn't take a genius to work out. If you withdraw the immigration of somebody, you're effectively, the state is saying this is a privilege, not a right. Then surely every right that the state has given us of naturalization, of citizenship, that too is a privilege. And any right can become a privilege. It can never end this process of whereby you are arrested as terrorist on a charge which the highest political authority in this country says was a major terror plot averted. That's what Gordon Brown maintained. Well, if they're terrorists, charge them. The photographs that these boys took in parks, the police went in Manchester and dug up the parks where the photographs were taken. They didn't find anything. We saw pictures of the family, gave me some pictures, and I said, I can't put these pictures up. I think it would be counterproductive. It had loads of young boys running around in the hills of Yorkshire, and they all had beards. And the brother said, well, you know, there's no girls there and no beard. Is that the problem? I said, well, it might be, but they probably look like terrorists on a training camp. And really, there were students out in fields, and in a sense, we've tried very hard to bring the humanity out of it, but this has been an extraordinarily difficult campaign to organize, primarily not only from fear, but the the things that confront us as well. Let me take you a little bit further on into what the defendants think they were arrested for. Tariqur Rahman, the guy who has gone back to Pakistan, I talked to him on a few occasions now, and he has no doubt, neither during the time when he gave his police, sorry, that was somebody else. He has no doubt he was arrested because he is a Muslim. The problem for a lot of this is not a theological issue. This is not an issue of Islam versus the West. These are political issues. He is arrested for the fact that he's a Muslim. The universities are spying on teachers, students, and asked to spy on students. I'm sure you'll hear quite a lot of that. We live in a situation where we are completely infiltrated and by MI5 agents. Kids are being forced into a position of working for the intelligence service, so much so that in Birmingham and Manchester, they've started to organize secret meetings. What can we do to avoid being pressurized at becoming, spooks or working for the spooks? It's a diabolical state of affairs. It's a state of affairs that is dividing. In fact, give you one anecdote before I move on. I have a very senior friend from the Jammu and Kashmir Liberation Front. His friend's son committed suicide, I think, in London about 4 or 5 months ago. The son has locked himself up in a room, convinced that the friend who has died has become an agent for the secret services, and he's going around from police station to police station saying, my son is not dead, he's been recruited by secret services. Now, I don't know what the connection with all this is, but it surely says something to us about what Britain is doing to the minds of young men and women, and what it is doing is creating all levels of psychological and social problems. So Tariqur Rahman says they're arresting us for Muslims. His cells are being sniffed at by dogs. After his visits to the solicitor, he's been strip searched as a category A prisoner. And they don't need to do strip searches anymore. You go through the airport, your bones are sealed. You don't need to do it other than a political campaign of humiliation and victimization. And the students were, so in one sense, firstly, a lot of people, we failed to explain to hardened campaigners in Manchester that actually the students are held not as terrorists, not a shred of evidence has been presented to them. Their defense solicitors knew nothing. Their defense barristers were not given any evidence because it was held in secret. Now, these secret courts used to exist in the colonies. Those of you who can stretch your memories to think of how Britain fought colonial wars, what they were doing in the colonies, they're actually beginning to do quite openly in this country. So in one sense, you know, the students are held on the charge of they have challenged their immigration, the order to deport. I won't go into the details of it. But the judge, referring to the police statement that these students are innocent, said actually that's a technicality. You know, it's not, you know, well, they're innocent, but we know they're not. Because he's seen some evidence that nobody else has seen any evidence. The important position over here is that the judge turned around to the student and says, this case might take on up to 18 months, you can go at any time you so choose. Tariq-ur-Rahman going back to Pakistan is due to the fact that he's a widower with 3 children. He has a choice of either remaining in prison for 18 months or going back to Pakistan. I could not remain in prison as a category A prisoner. I would go back to my children. I met another family recently. 2 of us did go over to Pakistan. We had 7 of the 10 defendants. One was a minor, an Afghan child. I think he's applied for asylum. 1 was released. 10 were left. 1's going back. 9 are still in prison. 7 of the 10 had a press conference in Pakistan. And after the press conference, one of the parents asked me, my mother, one of the brothers of the students inside asked me, my mother is dying. She doesn't know the son is in jail. She just doesn't know where he is. He doesn't know the mother is dying. What shall I do? I said, bring him back. That's what I would do if he's my brother. And it was a very tense situation because many of these mothers have, as I said, their dreams lie in the kids working overseas, let alone the fact there's a war zone and it's very tense. It wasn't very good before. So now it's their dreams, it's their lives, it's their aspirations, and it's their hopes. So in one sense, the families were very, very concerned. They tried to unite. And in order for 7 of the 10 to come, they don't know each other. The Northwest Frontier Province is huge within the legal borders, and it doesn't really have borders. It crosses to and fro into Afghanistan. The families came from vast distances. Even those who were coming from the big urban centers of Peshawar were spending 2.5, 3 hours getting out of the checkpoints that were taking place there. They traveled vast distances. Some of them traveled through the night. And they asked a very simple question to us. They're not stupid people. They said, well, if they're terrorists over there and they just come back, the stigma is never going to go. And if you know anything of how the Pakistani security force, they'll sell anybody for a bit of money. They've sold loads of people in the past, Guantanamo and where have you. So they don't know. The position of Pakistani government for once isn't that unreasonable in this issue. And that is really that if they're a threat to national security, they're a threat to national security in Pakistan, or potentially so. So the other side to the thing is the major complaint of the families in Pakistan is that whilst the President and the Prime Minister made very strong statements about the defending of these students, in practice they've done absolutely nothing. On the day we had the press conference in Islamabad, there must have been 40, 50 television stations, countless radio stations, dozens upon dozens of print journalists. The next day there wasn't a single article that we could find in any of the press. That doesn't mean there weren't any. Clearly there had been put a stop to it, and I think the stop had been put by the military establishment. But it still did come across here, which in some of the TV stations here broadcast the press conference, which in turn then got reported over there. So in one sense really, it's not all doom and gloom. It's not all doom and gloom because in a sense, one of the reasons this campaign is growing, I think the students are a catalyst to a process that our civil and human rights in this country are being wiped out at a speed which is so fast, we may not know what's coming at us around the corner. So in a sense, many of the old campaigners who are coming forward at the indignity of having young men imprisoned without charge for up to 18 months as Category A prisoners. I don't know, Gareth, whether there were people on terrorist charges who lasted 18 months as Category A prisoners. I don't know. But it's pretty serious, it's nerve-wracking, and it's soul-destroying. So in one sense, when we started organisation of the campaign, we didn't know where we were going. We had a very simple position. If they're guilty, charge them. If you've got evidence against them, charge them. Let them know what the evidence is. And I think that's due out on the 6th of July, some form of disclosure. Hence the meeting that we're taking today. Please get actively involved. Go from the meeting and do some letters. It causes problems for the bureaucracy. Write a few letters. On the 27th of July, I think some of the bail hearings will take place. But these are even extraordinary times. How are you going to find a place at which these people are going to be allowed to live? Because if they slap the control orders on them, who's going to be allowed to go there and visit? They're not going to be allowed to. No visitors allowed, no internet allowed, God knows what other restrictions they can put. But coming back into a conclusion really, for now, that is that we are demanding that an apology be given, we meaning the campaign Justice for the Northwest 10. The fact that Tariq has been deported does not mean it's the end of the situation. We're still trying to work out with some strategies of making it difficult for them, the British government and the Pakistani government, and they have a symmetry of interest. The British would dearly like them to go away quietly under duress. The Pakistanis would like them quietly to come back, so neither of them have to rock the boat, because the British pay a lot of money, the Americans pay a lot of money, the Pakistani regime gets a lot of money from this war on terror. They just want to keep it all quiet. In the processes, fundamentals are going wrong. We are linked to this, so we are asking for a public an apology for the students, from the Prime Minister's office. They'll be allowed to study. Some of the students have 100% record of attendance in 1 year, 98% at the time of their arrest. It's quite remarkable what they, even if they're going to be held for anything longer, give them the facilities in prison to complete their education. They have only just been allowed to contact their families. I know Nasrullah Khattab told me that at first they were only allowed to speak in English, then they allowed them to speak in Pashto to each other. If you're allowing the so-called terrorists to talk to each other, release them. You know full well they're not terrorists, and I don't think there's any shred of a doubt within the establishment that that's the case. Give them compensation, because they've lost huge amounts of money. Those of you from South Asia, you will know when you sell the family silver and come back, the debt is not clearable, certainly in one lifetime. And a few family members have said to us that when the children return, unless they return with some sort of the names clear, and they're allowed to clear the debt, we will never be out of debt. And I've forgotten what the other demands were, but I'm sure they'll come up with it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tariq. Tariq made mention of the next bail hearing that will take place on July the 27th. This is at the SIAC, which are special immigration courts at near the Royal Courts of Justice. We plan to hold a picket at this bail hearings. The date of the bail hearings are scheduled currently for the 27th, but it's never clear whether it will actually take place on that particular date. There's a chance that it might be moved to a different date. We have our website, which is right behind me. We will continue to post if we get more news with regards to when the actual date will be, but at this point in time at least, we plan to hold a picket between 12 and 3, between 12 and 12 noon and 3 p.m. Just outside the courts there. Thanks. The next speaker is Gareth Pierce. Gareth, I think, needs no introduction. She has been around also for a very long time. She's a human rights activist, a human rights champion, and a friend. Gareth's firm is representing some of the students who are in detention.
I'm not exactly sure that Tariq's quite right. I think that already the young men from Pakistan who were arrested in Manchester are actually known as yet another disastrous own goal police operation. I believe that that is the symbolic state they have for many people in this country. It's like Forest Gate. You just have to say Forest Gate and you know it was a catastrophe. They shot one young man, they wrongly arrested him and his brother. Or de Menezes. You just have to say de Menezes. Everybody knows. Well, there is quite a bit of that known about these boys in Manchester. You don't have to say a lot more to know the huge amount that goes with it. And sometimes, if you just see or hear or sit down with someone and speak to them, you know it all. And perhaps you remember when Koya and Kahar from Forest Gate actually very quickly had a press conference and spoke to the world. They had absolutely nothing to hide. They spoke. And everybody could see and hear what they were. Two completely innocent, law-abiding, decent young men. And if you could meet these young men in Manchester, you would know. And if you're a lawyer, defense lawyer, you aren't necessarily a complete idiot. You aren't necessarily a total soft touch. You believe anything. You just sat with Abid, who's the young man we represent. His whole body language, his whole way of talking, he's actually very relaxed. Of course, it's a appalling situation he's in a grim old Victorian part of a Victorian prison in Manchester. It's horrible. But he has that quiet calm of someone who has really nothing to fear. So he talks in a way that has the complete hallmark of innocence. He says, I don't know why I'm here. He says, I'm with people who've committed murder. I shouldn't be with people who've committed murder. In fact, legally, he's completely right. There are rules, prison rules, that say people who are not convicted, people who are on immigration charges, should not be with convicted prisoners. But they're choosing to ignore all that for these young men. But it isn't that. He's not saying he has a distaste for people. He's asserting the morality and the legitimacy of his position, which he is an innocent person. And he's saying, I'm only going to stay to clear my name. I'd be happy to go home tomorrow. I'd be happy to see my parents. Many people who are made the subject of a deportation order on the grounds that they're a threat to national security, which is the absurdity that's alleged against these young men. Many, in fact probably most of those people can't go to their countries of origin. They're in fear of persecution, they're in fear of torture, they've probably been tortured in the past and that's why they've been turned into refugees. This isn't the case. Abid would say, I would love to go home, but I've got to stay to clear my name. Now, sadly, he and the others will be considerably better off if they've been prosecuted by the police. They would by now have the statements in their case. They would now see what was alleged against them. But instead, they have a right to apply for bail. They exercised that right. They went to court to exercise that right. Abid had an address. He had sureties. He had letters of support. He had letters from his colleges. He had letters from Pakistan. He was not someone who people were running away from. He was saying, this is a fine, decent, respectable young man. We will pledge our money to get him bail. We will be sureties. He can come and live with us. That's all right. He's exercising his right to bail. But what did the state exercise? It exercised its claimed right to tell him nothing. No, that isn't a right. That is the opposite of a right. That is what the European Court for Human Rights has said is a non-negotiable violation of the fundamental rights of people within the whole of the Council of Europe community. That if you are deprived of your liberty, you have to be told a basic bare minimum of what's alleged against you. And the case was won by people wrongfully held arbitrarily, indefinitely, without trial. Won in Europe. In Europe said that, the European Court, in a resounding case in February of this year. So when these men came to court to apply for bail, they had a real expectation that they had to be told what it was that was alleged against them. But no, they were told nothing, absolutely not a word, nothing. And when the application was made to the court, look, if you are applying the European Court's judgment that you are bound in law, as a member of the Council of Europe, as a court in this country, you are bound by treaty obligations to implement the decision of the Court for Human Rights. The court simply looked and said no. You can try again for bail at the end of July. We're refusing you bail on the basis of no evidence. We uphold what the Secretary of State has said. We tell you nothing. Now you need stamina to fight the British state. You really do. And every day, even if the state knows it's going to lose everything in the case at the end of the day, even if the state can anticipate defeat, sadly it regards every day that it keeps someone in custody as a victory. Now, this young man, Habib, was taken on the state. He's applied for what's called judicial review to challenge the legitimacy of the Special Immigration Court to deprive him of bail on no evidence. It's a fundamental constitutional challenge. Can a court do this? Instead of having a hearing in a reasonable amount of time, he first has to establish that he can judicially review a superior court of record, which is what the court has made itself. What it means is, this is like a marathon, and when the court blithely refuses him bail on the basis of nothing that he is told, it says, well, at best we'll have a consideration of these cases sometime in the new year. Judge speaking to the clerk, tell me, when was the last case we fixed? Oh, February. Okay, this will be sometime after February. This is not prompt justice. This is not a recourse to courts that are dealing with the situation in a lawfully objective and managed way. It isn't. It's something else. It's a war of attrition, and the use of secret evidence is an enormous weapon in the armoury of the state, and it's a weapon that it is accumulating in any kind of case it chooses. So now deportation to a country where you might be tortured, but on the grounds of national security, it's now the state has gained victory, at least for the moment, in the courts. You can do it on no evidence at all. In fact, it was the first case it happened. It was the third. It was the same judge in the same court, started it in one case, followed it in another, and now Habib is the person who's inherited this appalling new venture in law. All of these are experiments. All of these, when Tony Blair said the rules of the game have changed in August 2005, it is isn't a game, and there are rules, but it's entirely true that the state has been constantly trying to change them. And these are battles and thoughts, indeed they are, but they're slow moving, they're slow motion, they're exhausting for the men or women who are on the receiving end and have to fight them. And someone like Abid is going to be a considerable amount of support, and so are the other young men. And when Tarek says that communities who can be classified within this country as the suspect community, the Muslim community, if that community has had good reason to be put in fear, then all of us, society as a whole, has a responsibility to come to the aid of these young men. If they're going to apply for bail at the end of July, they need people who can offer to be surety. They need people who can offer addresses at which they can live. These are absolutely fundamental building blocks for them to have some liberty. That liberty may be constrained, it's granted. But truly, the courts need to see, the government needs to see, that this is not acceptable. That maybe, for the moment, secret evidence is still staggering on as a concept that we are specialising in this country. We are seeking to export. We are seeking to persuade other countries to use it. We are seeking to persuade other countries to use indefinite detention without trial, even though this country lost that victory. We are seeking to deport people here to countries where there will be torture on the basis of secret evidence. And we're seeking to persuade others to do the same. In order to have any possibility of effective success, there has to be a recognition of what is going on. It affects only people. It affects people who are marginalised by the press as outcasts or outlaws, people who are tainted. That is not the case. These are decent, good young men that we were lucky to have come to this country to study here. Lucky to have come to this country who might be minded one day to work here. Abid was intending to go on and do a master's degree. When I asked him what he would do if he got bail, he said, I'll do two things. I'll ring my father and I'll take my exams. I've got to do my exams. I've got to get into that MA course next February. You don't have to be Sherlock Holmes to know that these are not terrorists. It is disgusting, it is disgraceful that we have been allowing this to be perpetrated on these young men. It's not just one. There is a sufficient body of them to make it an even greater scandal. And as Tarek says, these are young men who, for the most part, their families have saved all their lives to send them here. All of the family has worked to send them here, and this is what we've done to them. Now, it's all very well to talk theoretically in law about secret evidence and what it means. What it means is a complete train crash of a life, a catastrophe, and it's a catastrophe that we're sending that message out. So, that's all I want to say.
Thank you, Karen. Tarek earlier mentioned that many of these students have not had an opportunity to speak to their parents. It's nearly been 3 months since they've been detained, and it's only been last week that some of them have been able to speak to some of their relatives. I also mentioned the SIAC hearing, which will take place probably on the 27th. Some of the parents wanted to come here to the UK. We're trying to organize it for them. They will have all kinds of impediments like visas and so on to actually get here to the UK. We're also trying to raise money so that we are able to assist them to be able to come here to the UK for that particular hearing. There will be a bag going round, and I would urge you to donate generously to the campaign so so that we might be able to financially assist some of them with the expensive airfares. Secondly, campaigns also need money to run. I mean, we've incurred a significant amount of cost. Most of it has actually been paid out by individuals who have actually been involved in the campaign. So please dig deep and give as much as you can. Our next speaker is Dorothy Wright. Dorothy is from the University College Union. She is active here in the London region. I'm delighted to say that the UCU were one of the very first unions to pass a comprehensive resolution supporting the campaign and supporting the students as well. Their support has opened significant avenues, giving potential for other academics to get involved in the campaign and then support the students as well.
Thank you. I'm Dorothy Wright, activist for UCU at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine just across the street, and the London Region UCU Committee, and a member of the National UCU Academic Related Staff Committee. I've been asked to speak about UCU's support for the Northwest 10 and our campaign opposing the new points-based immigration policy in general as it applies in higher and further education. And can I just say, I'm incredibly honored to be here. Thank you. At UCU's Congress at the end of May, we passed an emergency motion condemning the treatment of the Northwest 10. First, I want to read a statement to this meeting and this campaign from Martin Ralph, the originator of that motion, and hence UCU's support for this campaign. To the Justice for the Northwest 10, I am writing to express our solidarity with the J4NW10 campaign. I am Secretary of the Liverpool Branch, University and Colleges Union. Our branch moved an emergency motion at the UCU Congress in May this year that was overwhelmingly supported by the Congress. UCU Congress stated that Congress agrees to 1. Demand the 10 students are released immediately and allowed to complete their education. 2. Support the Justice for Northwest 10 campaign. And 3. Write to the Home Secretary demanding the deportation is stopped and that they are released. Following this, the Liverpool TUC agreed the same motion with the additional point to invite a speaker from the Justice for the Northwest 10 campaign to the 16th of July Liverpool TUC meeting. It seems that 6 or 7 of the students held were seized in Liverpool and are from John Moores and Hope Universities and Kaplan, which is a private multinational education provider that is based within Liverpool University and provides one-year foundation courses. While Pakistani students are raided and seized, the vultures of the multinationals are raiding and trying to seize at least parts of public education. Justice for the Northwest 10 campaign is being raised with representatives of Unite, Unison, and the NUS in Liverpool, and generally there is a feeling of shock and anger against what has happened. No doubt many more union branches, regions, and conferences will support the campaign and demand for the release of the students if union members put this type of motion. As trade unionists, we have the international responsibility to defend those who are suffering racist attacks in the name of the war on terror, and these events show the collapse of civil rights in this country. I wish you every success with your meeting and campaign. Martin Ralph. Following the motion that Martin mentioned, which if memory serves me correctly, we passed unanimously, Sally Hunt, the General Secretary of UCU, has written to the Home Secretary, and I'll read a brief excerpt from her letter, 23rd June 2009. Dear Alan, UCU calls on you to stop the deportation of these students and release them immediately. We believe this should be done not just because of the unjust treatment they are suffering, not just because these actions are clearly fueling Islamophobia, but also because, yet again, this is another example of an attack on all our civil liberties. I have to say UCU is very aware of the Preventing Violent Extremism agenda on campus, and as I have stated many times before, we are resolutely opposed to violent extremism. Over the last few years, the government has expended a great deal of time and money into developing guidelines for tackling violent extremism on campus. It seems again, as in the case of Hicham at Nottingham, the existence of the government's guidelines are neither here nor there, as the police can storm in and make arrests with impunity. I urge you again to stop the deportations and release the students. Yours sincerely, Sally Hunt, General Secretary. I want to talk a bit more about the wider issues of this campaign and the government's policies for the University and College Union. Even before the students were arrested, there was a widespread opposition developing in the UCU against the new points-based immigration system that the government has been developing in the past few years. This is now a major area of campaigning for UCU, as you will see in the next several months. A bit about UCU's points-based immigration campaign. A summary of its impact on education. Educational institutions must now be licensed by the Home Office to take foreign students, and must meet reporting requirements to the Home Office on these students, which will involve some sort of monitoring by people at the host institution. If any key appointments these students are due to make are missed, the student must be reported by staff at that institution to the Home Office. Imagine only what the Home Office will do. The students will have to carry biometric ID cards. Academic and related staff, who are UCU members, and other support staff, Unison and other union members, will be expected to add to their duties that of extension to the border agency by reporting those students who miss these appointments. How this will actually be implemented in the coming academic year is still not clear, so it's not even likely to be workable at this stage, even if we weren't opposed to it, which of course we are. It will fundamentally change the nature of relationship between educator and student. All levels of staff at universities and further education colleges, whether they teach the students directly or support them in other ways. Some institutions have determined they will impose the same conditions on all students to avoid the obvious accusation that monitoring is done in a racist fashion. This adds even more to the ridiculous workload. Okay, the implementation of the policy on students already this year. Visas have been harder to come by and taken much longer to obtain. In the early stages, 60%, much higher than normal, were refused, many on technicalities nothing to do with the statements and pledging support to any member who refuses to implement the process. To write to all principals and vice chancellors, encouraging them to oppose this xenophobic policy, to urge the TUC to condemn the policy and join the campaign, and to produce campaigning materials for all branches. This past month, in June, a meeting called by the London region of UCU that is in the process of setting up a cross-union blog met. We have a blog at www.wearenotborderagents.wordpress.com and a group on www.unionbook.org, also under the name We Are Not Border Agents. We also have an email address, which if you can't remember all that, just remember this one, wearenotborderagents@gmail.com. Please email that if you wish to join, if you wish to be reminded of the blog and the group, and we will send you more details. We will also, I'm currently in the process with another member of setting all these things up. They're not quite finished yet, but we will certainly be including anything from the Justice for the Northwest 10 campaign on our blog and in our group. Additionally, the Bloomsbury London Living Wage campaign, which is another cross-union organization, and its support of the SOAS cleaners who were raided and some of them deported within 2 days with no access to any union or legal assistance. This is just another impact of the government's immigration policies. I also want to tell you a brief story about another case I know about that's similar but different to the Northwest 10. Some of the things that happen out of sight, and it's probably why this issue has resonated so much with me and why I've gotten involved in it. In my job as an IT manager, each year I employ a placement student for a year from one of London's universities known for their widening participation agenda and large numbers of foreign students. A few years ago, I had an excellent Muslim Sri Lankan student for a year. At the end of that year, he returned to the University of East London and successfully completed his degree. Within a year, he had a job in IT and successfully applied for a visa to remain in the UK and take up his job. That was last July. 4 months later, finally, another thing that's happened in my life that I was talking to Resum from Nottingham about before this, and I'm sorry I'm throwing it in at the last minute and lengthening my speech a bit. My family moved from Canada to the US in 1965. We were held up for 3 months because my father couldn't get a visa. They wouldn't tell him why. My father was a medical physicist. He'd been a physics lecturer at Auckland University in the past. He had no idea what the government of the US held against him. They kept saying, there's something you're not telling us. This was 1965. Imagine how much worse it is now. Turns out, eventually, the institution he was going to work for really wanted him and pulled some strings. And what was against him? He'd given a talk at the request of an NGO in Auckland, in his capacity as a physicist, about what would happen if a 20-megaton nuclear bomb or some such was detonated over Auckland, in his professional capacity. My father was left-wing but not remotely politically active. It never occurred to him this was something that anybody would hold against him. Eventually we got to the US. Anyway, I just mentioned that because my father's degrees came from Nottingham. And I was talking to Rezwan about this earlier. Okay, the impact of these policies and the actions of the government, police, and border agency on a society and the world should be clear. An increase in Islamophobia and other forms of racism. Recently, one friend made a comment to me in a conversation about my former student, Aslam, and my decision to speak up for him at SciAC. He said this was perhaps not wise of me, and said, there's probably no smoke without fire. So now, we're seeing an increase in people who think they are not racist, slipping towards racist interpretations of events. We're in danger of becoming a society that sees escalating decreases in civil liberties, which is pretty much what Gareth said, and basic human rights, decreasing access to justice as these cases are tried in secrecy, and a society in which one is guilty until proven innocent, and the ability to prove oneself innocent is removed, largely in a racist fashion. Another quote, this one from Martin Ogilvie, a PCS officer in Birmingham, in support of the Justice for the Northwest 10 campaign that came around UCU's activist mailing list recently, illustrates probably better what I mean. He said about the continuing assault on our civil, legal, and human rights in the name of the war on terror. While at present Muslims bear the brunt of these attacks, the state will use repressive laws and policies against anyone when it suits them. The increasingly aggressive tactics used against G20 and the climate change protesters are recent examples. End of quote. We're seeing a degradation of a just society led by our government into one with a business focus, yet without much success at anything other than bailing these businesses out, into an isolationist society where they curtail funding for training for English for speakers of other languages, ESOL, and teaching foreign languages to those of us who speak only English. In what mindset does this make sense? UCU is strongly against the cuts in ESOL and language teaching, and the FE sector in particular has seen some major successes in the ESOL campaign. Also being cut are vast areas of adult education. Again, courses that are of great use to immigrants to this country to help them either gain the skills or transfer their existing skills to help them in the UK economy, and thus to help the UK economy itself. All these cuts in a recession, and we're in a backdrop of fostering cultural and racial divides amongst groups of people that just make no sense. This government is contradictory at best, and who knows what at worst. It voices platitudes that should be real policy, widening participation, lifelong learning, and so on, and then puts in place policies, cuts to education funding and draconian racist immigration policies that further divide society and do not achieve the goals they were set up to allegedly created to achieve. How can we expect to improve the prospects for peace in the world if we do not all move amongst each other, communicate, learn, live, and work together? Migration and education both can and should foster understanding and affection. One of my previous placement students, now a permanent member of my team, I was lucky enough, he's a British national of Pakistani descent. I was lucky enough that he was my placement student on September the 11th, 2001. His presence in my team protected me, I believe, from the American rhetoric about what was going on in response, in their ridiculous response to those attacks. Isolation fosters suspicion and enmity and grave risk to the world in these perilous economic and climatic times. We must resist any and all actions that increase moves away from equality, justice, and civil liberties before it's too late. Trade unions, of course, and UCU in particular, have a valuable role to play in this. One last thing about me. Past 4 generations of my family, including me, have emigrated. We're now spread out over 5 countries. My siblings and I live in 3 different countries, none of us in the country we were born in. The oldest in the next generation, my 16-year-old niece, wants to move as well. I want to live in a world where this continues to be possible, where culture, understanding, and knowledge are global, not capitalism, exploitation, hatred, and suspicion. If this happens, why bother reacting to the terrorists anymore? They've already won. They've destroyed what's best about the rest of the world. What have we left to fight against if we give up our own belief system? I just want to end with a quote from William Saroyan's play, The Time of Your Life, written in response to the last major global depression on the eve of World War II, attempting to see a way through. Be the inferior of no man, nor of any man be superior. Remember that every man is a variation of yourself. How can we continue to learn that in the UK these days if we do not resist any and all attempts to teach us otherwise? Thank you.
Thank you, Dorothy. You can see the website for the Justice for the Northwest campaign behind me. If you actually do go to the website, you will see that we actually do have an academics campaign. If there are any academics in the audience, or if you do know an academic, ask them to get involved in the campaign. Currently, to date, we have over 100 academics who have written to the vice chancellors of the universities which the students have actually come from, asking them to protest against the arrest, asking them to heed to the demands of the campaign, asking them to provide books for the students in order so they can continue with their studies and so on. So if you are an academic, or if you do know an academic, visit the website. There are standard letters there which you can actually use to actually write to the vice chancellor. Our next speaker is Asim Qureshi from Caged Prisoners. If some of you have followed the work of Caged Prisoners, if you've been to the website of the Caged Prisoners, you will see that they have a tremendous history and a tremendous amount of work they've actually done. They are also a tremendous resource to various countries. Asim, I think it's easy if you come and sit where I am. So,
Michael Chertoff last year is one of the US secretaries, or was, I'm not sure if this is. He suggested last year in an article in the Daily Telegraph that British nationals who have a Pakistani origin should have special visa requirements on entering the US, that there should be a longer extended period whereby they actually have to make an application, background checks are done to their past family lives and whatever else. Why it's quite obvious, and it was the whole program, the whole idea was shot down very, very quickly with a quick apology from the US State Department, that it's intrinsically racist, and it was untenable for them to actually officially carry out such a policy, even if it carries on unofficially when you arrive and are detained for 5, 6, 7, 20 hours by Homeland Security. So the whole point is that profiles exist in this war on terror. The entirety of the war on terror is actually made up of various profiles. The ultimate one, of course, being the British-born Pakistani, which I'm proud to be on. Thank you. Because of 7/7, because of other events, it would seem that if you're a Pakistani individual and a British national at the same time, for some reason, you're flagged up quicker than anybody else. But it's not just us or them who are being targeted in such a way. Over the period of the last 7, 8, 9 years, what we're seeing is more and more profiles being created as various events take place. So of course what you had with all the troubles in the northwest of Pakistan, this new profile being created here in the UK, one where they're thinking to themselves, okay, if you're from NWFP, you've got to be troubled, because everybody's, the whole place is in turmoil, so if you're from that region, and if you're Pathan, then more than likely you're going to be troubled. The Pathan part might be true, actually. Joking. There are other profiles that have been created as well. The most major one that I can think of right now is that of anybody from or associated with the Horn of Africa. If you're from the Horn of Africa, you are being targeted. If you are trying to travel to the Horn of Africa, you are targeted. Just recently, I interviewed three British men who went to Tanzania for holiday. They were stopped there, and they were sent back. Essentially, what they were told is that by the Tanzanians, we're not really interested in you, we've just been told to send you back home. Okay, that's it. They went via Holland on their way to Tanzania because that's how the flight took them there. And when they got to Holland, who did they find waiting for them? MI5, waiting to question them about their trip to Tanzania, what they were doing out there. Tanzania is a whole country apart from Somalia, and yet because of the Somali conflict, any British Muslim male travelling to that region is automatically considered a terrorist threat. Gareth knows about a number of other cases that she's dealt with personally about British men who have travelled to Kenya, similarly on holiday, and just because Somalia is next door, they've been detained, they've been interrogated, they've been kept in horrible conditions and sent back to the UK. Further than that, many of you might have read the independent article about the men from Camden. Somali men naturalised here in the UK for many years. They grew up here, they studied here, they're just as British as anybody else, and yet they were harassed by MI5, and some of them are continually harassed by them, just because they are from Somalia. So they ask questions like, what tribe are you from, what do you think about the political situation, what do you think about the UIC, the Union of Islamic Courts, about the Shabab, so many questions that relate to Somalia. These guys are like, what are you talking about, man? You know more about Somalia than I do, why didn't you tell me what's going on over there? Because I haven't got a clue. And that's what it is, because the only way these people can operate is through the use of profiling, unfortunately. This has become the one key feature of this war on terror. That it's not about how much evidence you have, it's not about somehow coming across actually real plots and trying to intercept them. It's about, okay, who looks threatening to us? Who seems threatening? Ian Johnson and Hazel Blair's made similar comments about, we're not going to be really targeting old white ladies now, are we, when it comes to who we're going to be picking up. I remember I got stopped by Homeland Security once when I was meeting with a lecturer in the US, and the Homeland Security officer that was detaining me, he was African American, and he said to me, look, I'm really sorry about how long we're keeping you. I said, oh, it's okay. Muslims are the new black anyway, aren't they? And he put down his pen. He was really offended. I can't say that. And I was like, well, why not? He goes, well, Muslims could be anybody. You're not just a colour, are you? You could be white, you could be a woman, you could be black, you could be brown, anything. I said, you know what, you're right. So why am I sitting here right now? I said, the fact is that you profiled me from London. You're not going to stop a video of white lady. You're not going to stop a white male and various other ethnicities. The fact is that the only reason I'm sitting here before you now is because I'm a British-born Pakistani. And he said, yeah, okay, I admit that. I said, well, there you go. So we are the new black, right? Just in a different way. And he was like, okay, all right, fine, he said. But I mean, that's what it is, really. That's as clever as they get. The entire system is so stupid because intelligence gathering, there's no intelligence whatsoever. You've got a brown face, that's it, mate. You're done for kind of situation. Interesting thing about the Northwest 10, Garrett's already spoken everything, everybody else has done some brilliant talks, and I didn't really want to say anything about them, other than this one piece of information that I'd like to share with you. I've got some very strong contacts in Pakistan, and about 2 weeks ago, one of Pakistan's most senior security officials was having dinner in my house, and essentially he said to me that the day after, sorry, I apologize for that, but it's complicated.
Intelligence gathering.
Yeah, that's right, yeah, it's intelligence gathering. In fact, it's a very useful source of information. Anyway, the point is that, I was asking him about this case, because he's able to impart some knowledge onto me sometimes. I said, what's the deal with this? He goes, the day after these guys were arrested, they were on the phone to us saying, will you take them back? The day after. Okay? So, it goes to show that there was really no plot. Had there been a plot, they would have tried to investigate it properly, they would try to do everything they can in order to make sure that they brought criminal convictions here in the UK. Because it wouldn't suit them just to send them back to Pakistan. Technically it makes more sense to use the vast amount of anti-terrorism legislation that they have in order to prove that there was some kind of crime going on, and then further to find out who these people are connected to in the UK. These things make sense. from an intelligence gathering perspective. But none of that happened. What did happen was that they very quickly, back the next day, were on the phone to the Pakistani security services saying, will you please have these gentlemen back, because essentially, we don't know what else to do with them. And that's the reality of the situation. I won't tell you what the reply was, unfortunately, because I'm not allowed, but the fact is that is as intelligent as these people get, and that is how this whole situation is being integrated. You've been a wonderful crowd, man. It's been a long evening already, so I'm going to stop there and let Rizwan finish up properly.
Just before I introduce Rizwan, I just want to say that Gareth Makeup will have to leave soon. She has to say that.
I'll be done in 5 minutes.
She'll have to leave in 10 minutes. Okay. She has an important case. Rizwan,
I'll do my own introduction, so that I'll be afforded and sleep my name is Rizwan Sabir. I'm from Nottingham. I'm here for 2 reasons. One, to talk about the wider implications of the current war on terror against young British Muslims, especially of Pakistani origin. And secondly, as a representative and as a helper for the Justice for the North West 10. In May of last year, I was detained under the Terrorism Act and held for 6 days with a friend of mine, Hisham Yeza, who is currently serving a 9-month sentence, a criminal charge sentence for securing avoidance of some kind of technical jargon that I don't understand. He's in prison at the moment. He's, fingers crossed, going to be released within the next month, only to be probably denied his freedom because he will not be given bail because his court case against this immigration thing is still going on. But before I come to that, it's quite interesting where we're sitting today, because when I was coming in, I was driving here, I saw the BT Tower. It's not far from here, all the locals will know. And last year I was doing some reading about Northern Ireland and Republican terrorism. That was the first building that they blew in London when they brought their war to British mainland. After that, they had a subsequent campaign of terrorism where they bombed numerous shopping centres throughout the country. They bombed Canary Wharf. They fired mortars from vans at Downing Street while Prime Minister was inside in the briefing room and he got guarded. Some of you probably think it was Conservative, so it would have been a good job, but we won't go down there. But the point is that never did the British state, I mean, some of the policies, don't get me wrong, were quite draconian internally. But what you had was never this blatant and overt practice of institutional racism being carried out by institutions such as the Home Office or the police force. What you've got now, what the difference is between the Northern Ireland threat and the British threat, is that you can racially profile the Muslim threat. And it's ignorant, because Muslims don't come brown and black. They come white, they come green, they come yellow. It's a diverse religion. It affects everyone, or it can be anybody can be a part of it. But the point is that this one group now is being picked on by the state, and Hisham's case quite clearly highlights this, and it ties in quite nicely. Or shall I say? I mean, that's the wrong word to use, but it ties in very closely to the Northwest chaps that were arrested. And when they were arrested, I was sitting on my laptop doing some work, and I had the news next to me. I'm guilty of watching the news 24. And I saw it, and it was breaking news, and the lady was like, "We just had some breaking news, some terrorists have just been arrested." And I was thinking, all right, okay. And then they said that they were all foreign nationals. And the minute they said this, I thought, right, I know what's going to happen with this. I'm not Mystic Meg, but I do have an element of common sense. And from looking at the statistics of the individuals that have been arrested, most of them are released without charge. And usually when they're foreign immigrants, they are usually locked away again on immigration charges, very spurious arguments or charges, and threatened with deportation. That's exactly what's happened to the Northwest 10, and it's quite worrying how the state is being allowed to carry out this overt practice of xenophobia. Hisham was also arrested on immigration. After we were released after 6 days, he was re-arrested on immigration. So I know how the protocol works. Once the ball is rolling in the Home Office, there's no stopping it. But one advantage that this campaign has is that the amount of media coverage that it got. When Gordon Brown is talking with the Pakistani Prime Minister in Pakistan, talking about the Northwest 10, we've got a lot of coverage, and you should use that positively. Unfortunately, we didn't have that much coverage, where, you know, it was just two crazy people in Nottingham downloading stuff off an American subversive website, the Department of Justice, so, you know. But the campaign is very good in this way, that it's already had a lot of media attention, and you should use that. And once the ball's rolling against the Home Office, they start panicking. Because when we all overwhelm the Home Office with letters, and it was usually a template, like the one that's on the website as well, when we overwhelm them with letters saying that, look, this is wrong, you can't deport Hisham, what they did is they kept on delaying the hearings then, and delaying the hearings. And what that meant to the campaign was very good, it was very positive. We was like, we know they're on the back foot, and certain rogue elements within the Home Office, who I won't name, they were telling us that they're on their back foot, and they don't like this. So you're succeeding. Keep the media campaign going, keep the campaign going, keep selling Krispy Kreme donuts that I used to sell to fundraise. You need to do that. You need to use that media coverage that you've already had, as in the campaign. A lot of you need to start talking about this, whether that's in the mosque, be careful we say mosque, or the pub, or the university lectures, or seminars, or wherever it is. You know, even in the park, talk to yourself. You need to talk about this, and you need to get the ball rolling. You've got to remember that, I never knew that, but what Asim said is quite interesting. Will you take these guys back? Now, he's probably a rogue element of the ISI that I have no sympathy or love for, but don't tell me the uncle. But the point is that you can apply that pressure on these institutions, and as Gareth said, as hard as they are to fight, the point is that you can win. And she knows quite well after the Guildford Fall that it is possible to fight the state. And that's what we need to do here, as helpers or believers in the state of justice that this country is meant to represent. You know, secret trials and all these things, they fly in the face of due process and the rule of law. This is meant to be the basic fundamental tenet of our society, and it's being fallen flat on its face by governments passing legislation through the overt, or shall I say covert, trying to cover up basically their real objectives with this whole terrorism and all. We need to carry on fighting the state through, obviously, democratic means, and try and bring these people who have been locked away for a very long time now. 6 days felt like 6 years. I'd rather think what 3 months feels like. They need to be out in the open. They need to be able to finish their studies. They need to get back to their lives, and most of what they need to speak to their parents, who are probably going through turmoil right now. And with that bombshell of an
Thank you.
He's under a control order. His case is in the Royal Courts of Justice tomorrow. He's stateless Palestinian. He doesn't know the case against him. He's been interned indefinitely without trial, now under a control order nearly 8 years. He's a desperate man. I've got to go and see him tonight.
Thank you. Thank you, John. Hisham's been in prison for about a month now, for a year now.
Yeah.
Can I quickly, following on from what Gareth said on Mahmoud Abu Rida, tomorrow morning before the hearing in the court, there is a picket outside from 9:15 until 10 o'clock. Anybody who can get there, there's been a lot of publicity circulated about it. There should be a good crowd there. It should be as big as it can possibly be. So outside the Royal Court of Justice, as Gareth said, 9:15 till 10 o'clock tomorrow before the hearing.
Strand.
On the Strand.
Those who may not have heard that, picket outside the Royal Courts of Justice, 9:15 tomorrow morning, with regard to the case that Gareth made reference to. Okay. I think it's critical that we actually do link campaigns with similar situations. Linking the Free Hisham campaign to the Northwest 10 campaign and any other similar campaigns is an absolutely critical thing to do. Those of you who don't know much about the Hisham campaign, visit the website. Just Google Free Hisham and you will get onto the website. It's an excellent website. It has so much information in there telling you exactly what you can do. In fact, it's got a mobile website which you can use for many other things as well. I'm going to open up the floor to questions now. I would only ask that you actually do keep your questions as brief as possible and keep them to the questions rather than comments. We have to leave this room by 9 o'clock before we actually do have it for I'll try and take as many as I can. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, it really isn't a question, it really is a comment, but I'll ask it as a question if you are. Do you not think that it is counterproductive to underplay what was done to Irish people in the 70s and 80s as to make a point today? Because I do actually think it's come up a couple of times, and I do genuinely think that those of us who are quite old and can remember Dawn Reid's internment, the torture of women who were by strip searching in Brixton Prison, the Guildford 4, Birmingham 6, the Maguire family who were Irish and guilty purely by association. And Comrade, I'm not attacking you in particular. I genuinely think it's really, really important. History never repeats itself entirely in the same manner, but it does repeat itself. And to say this is not the same, there is no similarity, this is just so much work, is actually not taking what was done there. Internment was a huge thing, and not only that, everything that is being done today to Muslims or people who look like Muslims or people who might possibly be Muslims was practiced first by British colonialism in its colonies, including Ireland, and then was brought home to here to be to attack people here, including Irish people during that time, and Muslim people now. And I just think I wasn't the only person at that point going, that's not true. I thought quite a few people had that reaction, and it was important to put it back on the table.
We'll take a few more questions, but I'll ask
Can I respond? Yeah, Terry, you want to go first?
Yeah, firstly, I think it's really wrong to compare oppressions. It's wrong to compare one injustice to another, and also the fact that I don't think the implication of what Rizwan was saying was to denigrate or to do that. But I tell you one thing though, many people in this room, sitting here, we went on countless pro-Irish, pro-Republican demonstrations following the onslaught of the British state. We would love to see a reciprocality of struggle, that there is a continuity of history. So in that sense, I'll just stop on that one, and not to actually deflect off the central point here.
That's actually what I was trying to get at, but I'm not as articulate as the panel, so I probably said it in an awful way. But what happened to the Irish is unjustifiable in my eyes. What's happened to the Muslims at the moment is also unjustifiable. Like Tariq said, it's a continuation of an injustice. Yes, it is wrong to compare it and say, you know, they weren't allowed to be incarcerated for 28 days, it was only 7 of them. But the point was that in terms, so it was bad, but I'm saying that that badness...
Yeah, and category A for 20 years in
absolutely,
some cases.
yeah. So, yeah. I'll sort you outside.
the lady over there.
Can you explain what you mean, or what it means by being a category A prisoner?
Sure. Lady over there.
I wonder, I want to ask a question. If we think that what the government is torturing Muslims here, why the Muslim community keep silent and do nothing? Why can't we, as a Muslim, go and demonstrate every single day until this oppression, until this torture to end? That's all what I want.
Yeah, I'll stand up so I can be better heard. I'm afraid this is a response to your recommendation that people link campaigns. I'd just like to mention that there is a new campaign being formed, well, it was formed a few months ago, but it's now increasing its activity, called the the Coalition Against Secret Evidence. And one of the things we're asking people to do is to persuade their MP to sign up to an early day motion, which asks the government to abandon the use of secret evidence at SIAC and in judicial proceedings generally. That early day motion is number 1308, promoted by Diane Abbott, and there's a leaflet about it that's gone around the room. So please write to your MP and do that. And also look at our website, keep in touch with us, persuade your organisation to support this coalition, and take part in the next demonstration for Mahmoud Abu Ride, which will be outside SIAC on the 27th of July. Thank you. Sorry. Yeah, I know, there's another one.
I will take it first.
I just had a couple of really, honestly, so short bullet point questions. First of all, is it possible to write to the Northwest saying in prison, message of support, that kind of thing? Maybe not all of them, some of them, because I know they send me other received letters in prison. Does the government have any publicised justifications for seek evidence? I mean, they can't plug it without some reason, however ridiculous it is. And unfortunately, the woman's left. But I was going to ask about these biometric ID cards for Muslim students, and that sounds ludicrous to me, but if it's really going ahead, I'd like to know more about it. That's it.
It's not actually a question. It's a very short a letter in rhyme that I've written about Northwest 10. Can I read it? It takes no more than 2 minutes.
Sure.
All right. Thank you. Dear Mr. G. Brown, I feel sad and I feel down. Your justice system is false in London and in each town. You arrested some suspects. You were sure they were objects of some true terrorist gangs, part of some religious sect. You locked them each in a cell and gave them hard time like hell. You didn't charge them and yet deport them and say farewell. This is certainly not right. It is not a clean fight. You don't protect public, but you always use your might. Sometimes reason and justice, some kind of caring service will guarantee our safety, bring happiness and peace. This is food for fascist thugs who spread germs and bugs, those who spread hatred and behave like some mad dogs. Come and wake up, G. Brown, and find out why in each town you're so unpopular. It is time you step down. Come on, you old Labour fools, use your brain and your tools to save UK and nation from this horrible rule system. Please don't let bad get worse. You must attempt to reverse this dreadful situation. Don't let Tories ride the horse. Thank you.
I have a question to Rania, particularly to Tariq. How do we involve Muslim or particularly Pakistani community more? How can we set up smaller groups, particularly in areas of concentration of people from Pakistan, for instance, in East London? Could we hold small meetings? Could some of you come and address them?
One last one.
I think the case of the Northwest 10, as well as all the other cases that people have mentioned tonight, are very important, and I think explaining to others why it's in their interest that they oppose these attacks is the most important thing, because ultimately, although they go after, foreign-born people, for instance, scapegoating the sort of racial profiling that's been mentioned, ultimately, it's a class question, because the reason that they attack our democratic rights also has to do with the fact that they anticipate the kind of resistance that will come from working people as they try to make us pay for their crisis. And one other thing about immigrants is that immigrants are more often than not the most combative people against these kinds of attacks on education, on healthcare, and so forth. You only have to look to the United States, where millions of undocumented workers from Latin America have been fighting, protesting in their millions for legalization. It also underlines the importance of defending immigrant rights, and opposing the sort of British jobs for British workers that a lot of people have will have heard of that.
Thank you. I'm just going to ask the panel to respond to some of these questions, comments which I've already given. Then maybe we'll get a few more. Okay, let's do it.
Yes, the speakers have rightly identified this practice of racial profiling, and I'd like to pose a question of why this is happening so systematically. Some people say it's a mistake or a mistaken way of fighting terrorism, but I think that would be overly charitable. We should analyze why it's happening and put that into the publicity of our campaigns against these practices. You know, this suggests 2 or 3 reasons why, and see what these speakers think. First, it's a way to justify an bigger budget for the so-called security agencies and keep them in business in the name of protecting us. But then, more politically speaking, it's a way of branding whole sections of the population as suspects, in turn as a way of turning all of us into police informers, either voluntarily or not so voluntarily, under whatever threat of sanctions they may put on some people. And thirdly, most important, it's a way of defending, protecting state terror from dissent. The leaflet for the campaign rightly says, resist this extension of state terror. But that has at least 2 levels. These practices, which have been discussed this evening, is linked to British state terror around the world, especially in Muslim countries, and its state terrorist allies. So I think these links should be made whenever we speak or write about racial profiling.
Thanks. Go ahead.
Just a quick question. What engagement has there been with the media to try and get them on side to actually highlight this issue? And have you tried to get people like Tony Benn and Jeremy Corbyn kind of on side also? Because someone could possibly ask a parliamentary question or something on it, just so the government knows that not everyone is on their side and people are watching them.
Look, my name is Simon from the Campaign Against Communist Communities. Really, since the terrorism of 2000, we have had 6 anti-terror legislation. Even for me to grasp the immensity of this legislation, the police power is down there. We have to come to grips with that legislation, what it does. Can I tell you a story about SIAC, which you're talking about here? Do you remember the Iceland plot? It was a major plot, and it was mentioned in our nation just prior to the invasion of Iraq. 8 people were arrested, Algerians, North Africans targeted. No rice was found. There was a high court trial on that before the jury. Okay, they were all released. They were not guilty. What happens here? SIAC said that the fact that they were released by a jury doesn't mean they're innocent. And all the 8 were targeted for deportation. Something similar to that. They were moved on to SIAC. All of them came under pressure to get reported. Only one, called Sihali, who's here, who won the appeal. 7. Now, many of them were under such great pressure, and so that some of them had gone back to Algeria and restored. That's how SIAC operates. It's a secret court. It's the National Security Tribunal. And we need to compare against secret evidence, but we also need to compare with the abolition of SIAC. Because SIAC is not an ordinary court. You must get abolished. Second thing I appeal to you, if you read the media, Telegraph, the Observer, you come across reports with misinformation about Northwest 10, you must rebut it. For example, you heard of Killian Foundation. I don't know much about this organization, sponsored by the British. Majid Nawaz wrote an article. Amrit is there. She wrote to me saying, have you seen this article? It says in the 12th paragraph, here in the UK, after the release of release without charge of the 12 Pakistani students, terrorist suspects, we could do with a dose of truth serum. He was talking, he went to Pakistan, he's doing this program with this, the fact that his military went there. This statement is on the website as well as Killian Foundation. I've been in touch with them, telling them that this is not a flag. They're not being released, but they're being reported. I wrote to Observer saying that there's a factual error, that's not the truth. So I'm saying to you, there's a lot of misinformation. Please respond. Immediately when you see any reports by Times or Daily Telegraph, write to the editor. You may not get published, but keep on writing, please.
I'm just going to ask the panel to respond to these.
Can I just say something before the panel? I just wanted to say that why we want to link with other campaigns, we want to also build this campaign into stronger than it is now. And so if you want to join us who can be part of the campaign, please put your names down, because I noticed that there were two clipboards circulating. One was something circulated by Stop the War, Defend the Muslim Community. I'm not talking about that one. It's a Justice for the Northwest 10 clipboard. So if you haven't put your name down, and if you'd like to, please do so before you leave. And if you can't find the clipboard, then just give me your names and your email.
Thank you.
I have a question. I'm not asking question. I want to say thank you to all of you, behalf of Pakistani and international students, to run this campaign. And I'm very thankful to Jaspreet Singh, who invites me to join this campaign. And I think so, according to me, this is also Pakistani officials' duty to protect their citizens who are here to study or work, anything, who are using their passport. So you should involve Pakistan Embassy as well, because they are also here, they should be here, that we can ask the question why it's happening here with us, because we are using Pakistani passport.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Just very quickly.
Danny, one more question. I mean, that student is lying on a university campus. Why are universities allowing the police to arrest the students on campus? They should be doing it.
Encouraging.
Why are they encouraging? Yeah,
Encourage them.
Because I mean that's a serious issue, isn't it?
Okay, I think
why are universities saying you are not going to be doing that?
We've had enough questions here. I said we've got limited time, so I'm going to ask the panel members.
That sounds very key.
Come on, let's answer it.
I was just wondering what the views of the panel were. I mean, we fight so many individual family campaigns. We're all involved in, you know, constantly going from one campaign to one campaign to campaign. And some we win, and some we lose. But why do you think we are in a position where fundamentally we've not been able to build a strong enough movement to defend civil liberties? I mean, I think, you know, for many of us in this room, you know, if we'd have sat during the anti-racist struggles in the 80s and said we'd been in a position where we'd have secret trials, we'd have SIA courts, we'd have people being detained without charge, we would have said, actually, that's pretty impossible. It wouldn't have been within the realm of what we even conceptualised then, and even then when we were talking about very hard, you know, contrast between the struggle of the black community in the state around policing and violence. But yet, in the last 20 years, and as we've said, you know, 7 anti-terrorism pieces of legislation, and actually we've had not much impact in terms of being able to defeat. Why do you think that is? You know, what are the alliances we need to make? What's the politics? What's the framing? What's the narrative and discourse? We need to be able to try and challenge that.
I mean, I said that's a great question, a quick one at the end. But can I just start off by saying that if there are Pakistani students, overseas students here, by people who have got Pakistani overseas students, there are students from Manchester and a number of other places now trying to organise a committee so that they can unify all the different students. There's about 10,000 that come to the UK each year. And hopefully, you know, they're forming a committee. They've started the thing. If you give me your emails, I'll pass them on to the woman who's organising it, so that you can be in contact. And they're planning to hold an organisation by September to try to both protect their own rights and also pressurise the Pakistani government. Quickly going through the list, I don't know if any of the other colleagues want, but in a sense, the Category A prisoner, to be very quick, is the highest terrorist prisoner. Is that right?
Yes.
And the highest category you can go as a dangerous prisoner in this country.
So you can't write to them?
Well, that's the next question. I'm coming on to that. We don't have the details of all the prison numbers because of a complete mess within the solicitors. We do have prison numbers for some of them, and I think apart from 3, the other names are not public, though they're available on the internet. Their names have not been released. Some of the solicitors are not cooperating. It's a complete mess. So there's no reason why they can't be written to, but we've tried very, very hard to try to systematize the names, the details, the numbers. The families don't have them, though we know who the solicitors are, so we've got problems over there. I think that the Muslim community, as well as lots of other communities, are fighting back. You are seeing that fight. It's a tough fight. It's not a fight that's going to take place in one day. It's a very complicated fight, and I think we should always look at it like that the position is going on. So can the justification for secret evidence, I mean, I'd like to pass on that, maybe some other friends can do so. In terms of trying to organise communities in the northwest, I think it's way past time to organise, but it's really important to understand that we're only one phase in the attack. It won't always be Pakistani communities that are the focal point of this, but as long as the occupation goes on in Afghanistan, that will continue, and yes, we'll get speakers to you whenever you can organise a meeting. And I think that Muslim communities are involved, that it's really, people are very, very scared. So much so that if I can't give, because of time, I can't give you some of the anecdotal interest. And one person said that it's in the interest of local people and other people to fight. I think it is. If the defeat of these students takes place, and it's not impossible, for victory may not be as clear-cut as we imagine. Some may get deported, some may actually stay to fight to the bitter end. But we're living in an era of defeats, not just here in Britain, but internationally across the world. That's why it's called a depression. That's why our terms are very difficult to fight. So I think that the thing in front of us is very enormous. And in terms of the engagement with the media, actually the media have been very, very good in some parts with us. Certainly Granada News and places like that. They've been very keen to cover as much as they can. And some journalists from the North America have been covering the stories as detailed. And I asked one of the CBS journalists, what is it that's of interest to you? And he replied that from our point of view, is Britain becoming America's Guantanamo? And those were his direct words to me. And in terms of really, in terms of the engagement of the politicians, there's an early day motion. I believe name it was 28 or 30 MPs.
I think several, the list of MPs who have signed are on our website.
Yeah, there's over 28 MPs who have signed the early day motion. So the politicians are well aware of the campaign, and we're always writing, and usually we get responses back pretty quickly as well. I mean, I'll stop there.
Maybe just about how they justify secret evidence. The main thing is they try and justify their national security grounds. They say that we have information, MI5, MI6 have collected information about this individual, which, if released to the public, would be damaging to the public, would jeopardize national security, and because of that, they need to give secret evidence to the court so that the public can be protected. It's interesting that you made a point about Guantanamo Bay, because if you look at the Competent Review Status Tribunals, the CSRTs that were conducted in Guantanamo, they were three-man panel tribunals. Okay, so 3 people would sit and head the tribunal. They weren't, the use of secret evidence was allowed. You couldn't call witnesses. You weren't allowed to know the allegations against you in many circumstances. All of that process in place. SIAC is a replica copy. In fact, the first time I attended SIAC, when I saw it, it looked exactly like the pictures of the CSRTs at Guantanamo Bay. So people who say that, well, UK is becoming the UK's Guantanamo, it's already here. It's already being implemented every single day against all of these foreigners who are under these deportation orders. So don't be under any illusion regarding that. And just one point about the Muslim community, I don't think that the Muslim community has yet got anywhere close to dealing with these issues. A lot of what I come across is people who are very, 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 very scared. And for me, the one thing that I know gives a lot of Muslims confidence is when they see non-Muslims taking up the issue more than they are. Often it shames them, but more than that, it encourages them. I mean, I'll be very honest with you, most Muslims that I come across, and in my talks up and down the country, they say to me, look, we're happy to help out to a certain extent, but, we really can't get involved with this. Our parents will hit us or whatever, they're scared. Their parents are scared. And there's that mentality that the criminalized community is the one that is under the most fear and feels that fear the most. So, I really encourage my Muslim friends to really get involved and to give our community some more courage that yes, you can talk about this issue, you can get involved, and you can actually make a difference.
Can I also add that I think people are not really that fully informed and aware of the situation. And this thing about no smoke without fire, it's so widespread. And a lot of families, even Muslims would say, oh, come on now, but they must have done something. Oh, come on, this country doesn't do that. And that really
suggested the fires might.
Criminalisation of communities, actually, I can give you a very personal example. My mum doesn't know I'm here today. She came from Nottingham. And the reason she doesn't know I'm here today is because I didn't tell her I was coming today. Because if I would have told her that I was coming today, she would have been terrified that I was going to get picked up again. And this is what being arrested under the Terrorism Act and detained and having your home searched through, I mean, talking every nick and cranny being searched, this is what it does to your families. And traditional, my parents are very traditional. They came here in the 60s or whenever they came. They got on with their lives, they were law-abiding citizens. When a police officer used to come and knock their door to talk about a burglary 3 doors down, they used to invite them in and give them samosa and pakora and tea. This is how afraid or, you know, how highly they held police officers. But now, they're just terrified by this whole criminalisation that they've encountered firsthand. And getting through to them is probably one of the most difficult things. Talking to a young audience is one thing. There's testosterone and estrogen. So it's a lot easier to get through. But with the older guys, it's a lot more difficult. And I think only educated, calm rationalisations with them is going to really cure that problem. And until they support their younger children or members of the community, we're not going to be able to mobilise as an entire community. So I think that's what the focus needs to be on, educated not only youngsters, but also the elder people, who usually do put forward arguments like, oh, well, he must have done something. It's like, well, no, he didn't.
Just to give you another example on that, one of my researchers was a young Palestinian boy, not that young, he's married, and I was talking to him on the phone about a project that he's working on for me. His mum snatched the phone out and started shouting at me for, you know, essentially forcing him to do this research work. You know, this is a part of, you know, a report that we're going to be releasing properly. This guy's a married man, but you know, that's the kind of fare that we're talking about, that, you know, especially our parents' generation.
How can we be terrorists? We're scared of our mothers.
Exactly.
You know, like,
Can I make one point, please?
Sure.
Yeah.
Final point.
Final point. I don't know whether you know about the story of Ahmed Khatib from Palestine, whose son was murdered when he was playing with his toys. And I've written a very long poem to Obama about it. It's on my website, like you can have a look at it. But anyhow, the thing is that he was playing with his toy and they killed him. And the father actually took the heart and hit the toy hospital in Israel and said, take these, you know, organs of my child and give us peace. And this was not reflected in any media. That clearly shows that these people, you know, the state and the people who are spreading the Islamophobia and all this, they're not really, they are not, you know, fighting Islamic terrorism. They're creating terrorism, and they want this situation, and they want this war with terror because it's got some economic. They sell more armaments. You know, they make huge money, amount of money out of it, and that is the thing that we really have to share with the British public and say, listen, it's not against us, it's against you.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we've come to the end of the time that we have in this room. I just want to remind everybody of a few things. The first is to get involved in the campaign. The website is immediately behind me. And all the to-dos that we talked throughout this evening are on that website as well. A couple of things. One is, if you haven't given your name, I'm going to remind everybody to put their name down. Second thing is, that bag of money that's probably going around. We need to make sure that the money is actually there to support the campaign and support